We're talking about sex trafficking. We're talking about how it's infiltrating our neighborhoods, our schools, and ultimately our churches. And the impact of Rachel's story. I'm so glad, again, that you are just being so brave. But if we are thinking it's not happening, we're just being ignorant. So how can we talk to church leaders? How can we talk to parents? What are some things that we can look for to see this happening around us?
Well, so for example, we recently got a new car, and it's a silver Chrysler van, okay? And like I hadn't seen hardly any of those until we bought one, and now I see them everywhere. And
Right.
It's like, okay, no. It wasn't that they weren't there before, it's that I didn't have my eyes open to them. So as a church, we need to be talking about abuse. We need to be talking about sex trafficking. We need to be talking about predators, even within our church, because once we do, our eyes will become open to what's actually going on around us. Some churches believe it's almost taboo to talk about, because if you talk about abuse, then it's going to be there. Well, it's not that it wasn't there to start with,
Right.
but we need to be there for the victims. I think it's very important that we open our eyes to the fact that there are wolves in sheep's clothing hiding in our congregations, and we need to stop denying that. I've had the chance to get to share my story many times now, and so many women have come forward to me and said, I went to my church leadership and I told them there's a man in this church who sexually abused me when I was a kid. And they go to this person and the accused denies it, and then the church tells the victim, you need to forget it ever happened. You need to move on, turn the other cheek, and forgive.
So the church in and of itself isn't handling it well. Yeah.
And I want to say, God never said for a sheep to turn the other cheek to a wolf. Like, a sheep turn the other cheek to a sheep. Like, you stay far from wolves. Shepherd is there to keep the wolves out of the flock. And that's what we need to do as a church. We need to be in discernment and prayer and ask the Holy Spirit to give us guidance as far as wolves in sheep's clothing. Be very careful as who you hire as leaders, because they are purposefully seeking out those leadership roles, because they can abuse that authority and destroy your children and your church as a result. So, there's a website that I really enjoy looking at. It's called notinourchurch.com, and it gives lots of policies that churches can look into. It gives advice and tips on how to protect your sheep, your flock, from predators. And another thing I'm passionate about is the fact that, 1 in 4 women experience some sort of trauma in their life, and it's like 1 in 6 boys. So when you look at your congregation and you think of those statistics, and then you think how trauma impacts a person's life, and oftentimes it leads to sinful coping skills, ways to try to make the pain stop, and they dive into this because they need something to stop the pain. Well, as a church, we need to fill that gap. We need to be able to teach our congregation abuse is not a taboo word. Let's talk about it, and let's talk about how life happens after trauma, not to just deal with the impact of it, but heal from the impact of it.
Yeah. So how do we help them? How do we help those victims? If someone comes to me and says, hey, this is what's going on or what has been going on, what do I do? What do I do next?
Well, you have the first part down for sure. You're open and easy to trust and easy to talk to. And I think having relationships with all sorts of people is the start, because then as you gain that trust from people, they're going to be willing to share the hard stuff. And you're going to be able to see when something changes in their life or if they're struggling, and you can kind of ask questions. But then the next step is, I know for me, I had somebody who stepped in and they fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. They loved me when I hated myself. They were literally the hands and feet of Jesus. And this lady has never left me. She's gone with me to police stations, to counseling sessions. She's been my rock. And for a long time, I had to borrow her faith almost. Like, I trusted her, and her faith and trust was in God. And so I was able to almost borrow that faith until I was able to see God in a new way, and then it became my own. Yeah. But being that in between, loving them, being that Jesus to them, that's how you're going to help them the most.